Hey, this is Joe at graybenchelec. Welcome back to the pedal teardown series where I take apart new and interesting pedals and show you what's going on inside. Today we have the Cusack Music Tap-A-Scream. Alright, this is the Tap-A-Scream from Cusack Music. It is a tap tempo overdrive pedal. As far as I know, it's the first of its kind, maybe the only of its kind. It's definitely a pretty unique thing. It's not entirely clear just intuitively what the tap would be doing for an overdrive pedal. We're going to talk about that. Cusack Music, John Cusack. They're not that popular under their own brand name. They do have a line of pedals, the Tap-A blank pedals, that include the Scream overdrive here, the Tap-A whirl, which is a tap tempo tremolo, the Tap-A delay, and there's a reverb, I think, as well. They weren't wildly popular. However, John Cusack has set up his own manufacturing facility where he makes pedals for a lot of different people. They also do PCB design, I believe, for probably even more companies. So chances are, even if you haven't played a Cusack branded pedal, you've played a pedal made by Cusack Music at some point. This is the Tap-A-Scream, so like I said, it's a tap tempo overdrive pedal. And unlike a tap tempo tremolo, which modulates the output volume, so the signal goes up and down in volume at the output, the Tap-A-Scream modulates the amount of distortion. So it's essentially like, in a rhythmic fashion, turning the gain knob up or down here on the overdrive pedal. You also can hold down the bypass switch and deactivate the tremolo portion, the modulation, and that will cause it to be just a standard overdrive pedal. Based on the name, I would assume that the overdrive circuit is similar to a tube screamer, meaning it's going to be based on a dual op amp that has clipping diodes in the feedback loop of the first op amp for soft clipping. Unlike a Proco Rat, for example, that has hard clipping to ground via diodes, this is going to have diodes in that feedback loop, soft clipping. So we have typical overdrive controls, level, tone, and gain. We have a clip mode, which I believe changes between different diode configurations. But on the end here, we have an option control and a wave control. They both affect the modulation, the tremolo effect, even though, like we said, it's not actually tremolo, it's increasing up or down the gain or the distortion for the pedal. And then there's 3 different banks with different waveforms that's controlled by the wave control here. 2 5mm LEDs, one is a bypass LED, and one is the gain control LED that shows the gain going up or down or in and out. We have our bypass switch, turning the pedal on and off, and the tap speed, so your actual tap tempo tremolo control is here. The pedal is housed in a 1590 BB size aluminum enclosure. All top mounted jacks. So we have our 2 plastic style jacks, isolated jacks, 1/4 inch, a PCB mounted DC jack, an RCA jack, which is interesting. We'll talk about that. That's an external connection for an external time tempo. Nothing on any other side. Back is bare. As far as I can tell, the logo and all that is actually, it looks like it's milled into the top of the enclosure here. I suppose it also could be like laser engraved, but it looks like actual mechanical engraving with a little engraving tool. Not by hand, of course, by CNC, but it does look engraved. We can also tell at quick glance that the toggle switches here for the clip mode and the bank switch are both PCB mounted. They must be because their shafts are smooth, so there's no nut holding on the screw to the enclosure, so they have to be PCB mounted, otherwise they'd be flopping around. The foot switches feel like non-latching foot switches, so probably single pole double throws, which means for the tap tempo, we're just closing and opening a contact in there. For the bypass, that probably means we're doing relay switching. That's pretty much it for the outside. Let's go ahead and crack it open. Alright, so we have the PCB assembly liberated from the enclosure. A couple quick notes about the enclosure. It's made by Greenstone USA. You can see here that the holes that were for, or I should say really the slots that were for the 1/4 inch jacks are cut as open notches in the enclosure, which means you don't have to come in and insert it sideways or put the jacks in first and drop the PCB onto it and solder it that way. They can just drop in, they can slide in like this. This is one of the ways you can deal with having components that are at 90-degree angles with the jacks pointed up and the potentiometers here and the multi-step rotary encoders here pointed out orthogonally to that, 90 degrees out. You can just put slides or notches like that so the jacks can slide in and out like that. Alright, so here is the PCB and external off-board parts for the Tap-A-Scream from Cusack. We have what look like the standard Neutrik 4-inch isolated jacks. They both look like stereo jacks as far as I can tell, but probably the output jack is not using the stereo connection or the ring connection, whereas the input jack is probably using that to turn the battery on and off. It is relay switching. You can see that Panasonic relay here. This is a pretty typical component for relay pedals. It is a TQ2-L-4.5 volts. We have an optic coupler here, so that's a combination of a photoresistor and an LED. I'm not sure exactly what it's doing here. It might be isolating the jack or something like that from the tap circuit. We also have a dual op amp here. It's the standard RC4558. This one from Texas Instruments. It is socketed, which is nice. So if that chip ever goes bad, you can swap it out for a working one. Or if you like to experiment with ICs, you can pull out that one and throw in something else, like an OPA 2134, something like that. There is a 5mm LED here, which when I was playtesting it was lighting up during gain. So I'm assuming this is one of the options for clipping diodes. You do have a three-way diode switch here. So this is probably, I think it's the middle position because that's the loudest. LEDs have a high forward voltage, which means it's going to let more amplification through before clipping. We have our off-board connections down here with these little header connections. We have our bypass switch. That's the single pole, single throw, momentary switch here. This is, I don't recognize the brand. It sort of looks like an E surrounded by a circle, something like that. And the part number R13-85, probably the same here. Yeah, same switch there. Battery, snap connector. We also have the internal tap connection and the external tap, which is that RCA jack right there. Flipping over to the other side, here are all our components, or most of them. We have our potentiometers for values. The level pot is a 50K linear. The tone pot is a 5K linear. And the drive pot is, or gain pot, is a linear 50K. And then we have two rotary encoders here. They are manipulating the option control on the left here and the wave control on the right. Our bypass LED and our gain LED, something switching through the banks. This chip down here is probably the brains of the operation. It's probably a microprocessor of some variety. Get the part number off that. Yeah, so that's a PIC microprocessor, PIC 16F88, with from the Micro Semi, I think is that logo. A couple smaller ICs here. This one down here, I can't read it, LMC something. It's a National Semiconductor something or other. And this IC over here is a Texas Instruments. That one's really tiny, I can't read that one over there. As far as I can see, all the components except for the LEDs and the switches and potentiometers or encoders are all surface mount. Like I said in the intro, John Cusack has a surface mount PCB manufacturing facility. Pick and place machines, all that, wave soldering for the through-hole stuff, but also the like the solder masking and ovens and whatnot to do surface mount builds, machine-made builds. So that's what it looks like. Everything's super clean and consistent. Funny note about the knobs, even the knobs are marked Cusack Music, so these are actually made also by Cusack, and they look like they're injection molded. You can see where the flash was cut off. If you saw, they also had these little rubber O-rings around the potentiometers. I'm not exactly sure what these are doing. It might be just a preference thing about how far the knob sits down on the potentiometer, or it might be to make it easier to remove the knobs because there'll be more space off the enclosure. So if you push it down too hard, it gets stuck. You can't get anything underneath to pull it off. Could be that. One thing I don't see is like a dedicated ground connection for the PCB. It might be they might be using the external tap control because this has this little O-ring with a ground tab. Or, I think like we saw with a different pedal, they might be getting ground from the potentiometers where they touch the enclosure. They're not getting it from the DC jack or the quarter-inch jacks because those are isolated jacks. So yeah, not sure where the pedal's getting ground exactly. So I thought what might be fun for this pedal is because it's a tap overdrive rather than a tap tempo, I thought it'd be interesting to look at the signal on an oscilloscope so we could see first what we would expect for a tap tremolo, where the actual waveform is moving up and down in amplitude, versus this, where we should see it changing in terms of clipping. So let me set up for that test, and we'll be right back. All right, so we're hooked up now for the oscilloscope test. I have two traces here on the oscilloscope. The yellow trace is the input signal. We're doing a sine wave at 1 kilohertz with 250 millivolts amplitude, 0 volts DC offset. You can see that here as well. The yellow trace is the input signal. The green trace is the output. The pedal's in bypass right now, so it's a true bypass pedal. So the signal is just going in through the relay back out to the output jack. If we turn on the pedal and reconnect the leads that fall off, we can see here our amplitude is really high, so we'll bring that back down. So we can see the pedal is doing tremolo-ish things. However, what you'll note here is that the waveform is not changing significantly in amplitude. It is a bit, but it's changing more in shape. It's going from this basically sine wave here up to this sort of shark fin type shape that's familiar or common with soft clipping. We can adjust the tempo of that with the options knob here. So now that's a little bit faster. The distinction I want to draw here is that this is a tap tempo distortion pedal or overdrive pedal. So we're not making huge changes to amplitude, at least not intentionally. We're making changes to the amount of distortion. And that's what we can see here is the waveform is changing shape more than it's changing overall amplitude. If we turn off, I'm going to turn off the modulation by holding down the bypass. So now we have just like an overdrive pedal. What we'd expect to see from a typical tap tempo tremolo is a modulation in just output volume, amplitude. So that would look something just like turning up and down the volume knob like so. I'm just sort of rhythmically turning that volume knob, and you can see the amplitude is going up and down, right? That would be a typical tremolo pedal looked at on the oscilloscope. But that's not really what we're seeing when we turn on the pedal. When we turn on the pedal, I'm going to turn back on the modulation. It's not really bouncing up and down, it's changing shape. That is the tap tempo effect of this pedal. It's affecting the amount of gain that's changing the waveform rather than the amplitude. This is the second page of the manual for this pedal, and you can see there's 3 banks of different waveforms that's controlled with the waveform knob on the right side there. And so we're looking at bank 1, waveform 1, which is just, it's sine wave-ish. The rate of change isn't quite the same like it would be for a true sine wave. You can see the slope gets a little steeper here at the like the crossover point, but it's pretty sine-ish. Second one, we'll have a look and we'll step through these. So the second one here should be a triangle wave. So slow rise, or no, quick rise but slow fall. And then we can look at maybe 4, a square wave. So there's our square wave where we're just sort of clicking between 2 separate settings, almost like turning the bypass on and off for just an overdrive pedal. And we can also look at maybe 7, which is more of a random generation waveform. So we'll go all the way down, then back 1. So this waveform, this oscillation here is random like this. You can see that there. You also slow that down a bit. So using the oscilloscope here, we can see how this pedal is not a true tremolo in the sense that it's modulating amplitude. It's modulating the amount of clipping, changing the waveform of the signal. The overall volume stays roughly equivalent, at least as far as the actual output voltage is concerned. You know, there is a little bit of change. About each division is 500 millivolts, so you know, it's maybe 50 millivolts or so change. And I can tell you from playing it, it does sound similar to a tremolo because we are hearing that amplitude change, but it's not quite. It's softer. There's something different about it. And that's what you're hearing here is the clipping, the amount of gain actually changing. The modulation effect here is like turning the gain knob up and down rhythmically. All right, that was a teardown of the Cusack Music Tap-A-Scream. If you have any questions or recommendations for a pedal you want to see on an upcoming teardown episode, let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate you hitting the like button and subscribing. I'm Joe from Graybenchelec. Thank you for watching.